Hello everybody, my name is Maria Gillen and I'm Story Seeds and I love this storytelling cottage. I spend a lot of time here and there's 300 years of storytelling that's after being put into these walls, and singing and dancing. They would have danced the flagstones into place in these cottages. So it is with my great heart that I now feed the walls of this house with this story. So this story is a co-created stories. It's one of my favorite ways of bringing the living art of storytelling forward. And I met with the Forestry School of Ireland up in the north of Ireland, and we went foraging for a day in the forests, and at the end of the night they built a fire at the edge of the forest, and they knew how to do it safely so that the forest would be safe. And then we began to pull the red threads of story, and this story coalesced between us. There is a forest. It is called the unknown forest. It likes it that way. It wants it that way. For it has found that the children of men and women can cause damage to the children of the forest, to the young trees at the edges. But there are exceptions, because the forest allows and welcomes the Manafasa, the wise women. In your place, I don't know how these women are called, but in my country, they are known as the Manafasa. And at the edge of the forest lived a Banfasa. Her name was Sean Nos Sheila, Sheila of the old ways, Sheila of the ancient ways, Sheila of the old wisdoms. Sometimes Sheila would get up in the morning and with an empty little bucket she'd walk into the forest, and the forest would show her its bounty. Sometimes there was mushrooms on an old log. Sometimes there was a bit of lavender to sweeten your life. Sometimes the superfoods of Ireland, the nettle, was growing abundantly, and she would fill her basket and she'd bring it back to her little cottage. A little cottage just like Sheehan's. And she'd come in and she'd set the kettle on the fire to sing. And when it was singing, she'd begin to add something from her basket. And before long, a knock on the door. And when she'd opened the door, she knew that the tea she was brewing was the exact tea that that person would need. Sometimes people would come in and they'd say, Sheila, my knuckles are sore and they're swollen and I have to play the music for the wedding in the hall down the road. And Sheila would put her own heat into those bones that needed it. And sometimes she would give them a sweet tea and they would drink it and they would feel better, and she'd give them a package of tea and she'd send them on their way to play the music that was much needed to lift the hearts of the people. And sometimes someone would come in with a busy brain. Have you ever had a busy brain? Can't stop making lists, can't stop making plans. You wonder, did you unplug the iron before you left the house? And Sheila would say, take a seat by my fire. And she would give you a crocheted blanket that she'd worked on herself. And when you smelled it, it would smell of warm memories and Granny's apple tart, and maybe a small bit of cinnamon in that apple. And as you sat there, she'd give you some sweet tea, maybe with a little bit of lavender in it, to make your heart run slow. And as you sipped your tea, she'd sing, Shaheen Sho lo lo, Shaheen Sho mo cree. And as she sang, you find yourself falling into a deep, deep, beautiful sleep. And when you start to wake, you'd say, Sheila, Sheila, you let me sleep. And she'd say, isn't that why you're here? Didn't you come to me to sleep? And she'd give you a package of tea and she'd send you on your way. And Sheila knows how to listen to dreams. Do you know how to listen to dreams? Sheila would go to sleep, and in her dreams she might hear the grandmother tree calling her. Shan Waher Creen, the grandmother tree. Do you know what a grandmother tree is? It's that tree in the middle of the forest. And when she was a young sapling, she threw her seeds out all around her and her babies began to grow. And that was the young forest. And then over time, they invited in new partners, new species of trees, and the forest began to mature. And now it was an old forest, and Sheila was called by the grandmother tree. She got out of her bed, and even though it was a dark and rainy night, think of Ireland in November, in the month of the dead, when the stars have gone missing and the moon is on holidays. But Sheila did not need light to bring her to the grandmother tree, for she trusted the soles of her feet and she danced through that forest, knowing every inch of it, until she sat once more near the grandmother tree. Two big green velvet roots came up out of the ground and she settled between them, putting her head on grandmother's heart. And as she slept, she heard what grandmother needed her to hear. The farmers are fighting. The farmers are fighting, Sheila, and I'm worried for the children at the edge of the forest. Sheila came up through the layers of sleep and she thought to herself, what am I supposed to do with that? The farmers are fighting. How am I supposed to help? And she did what she always did when she had questions. She let her eyes move lazily across the forest until she saw something unusual. And in a ground that was covered with muck, in a place where the trees were losing their leaves, she saw a pristine white feather. She bent down and she picked that feather up. And then, because she couldn't resist or didn't want to resist, she pulled her fingers through that feather. All the colours of the world revealed, and she began to feel the change as her shoulders went behind her back, as her strong arms became strong wings, as her neck grew long, as she took to the sky and flew over those trees, noticing how they leaned into one another, how they whispered to one another, how they never took too much space. We could learn a lot from trees. When she got to the edge of the forest, she saw them there, the fighting farmers with their screwed up faces red with rage, throwing down their tools, pointing at the forest as if this was the next thing they were going to clear. The heaviness of it pushed Sheila back down through the trees until she landed once more softly at the edge of the grandmother tree. How will I help, she said. And like they always did, all through the ages, she began to call on Nos on the ways of the wind. Tar cuim, Nos tar cuim, come to me, wind, come to me. And soon the wind sang through the branches of the trees. Come Call the people of the tea. Call the people of the tea. Of course, she said. Of course I should call the people of the tea. So she sat between the two green roots and she said, if you're there, if you're free, if you can, come to me. Tar cua Modina, tar cua Moclan. And they did. First one person, Sheila, you'll never believe the dream I had. And then another person, Sheila, I had this crazy dream. And she said, look at you, listening to your dreams. And soon there was a fine crowd of people around and she said, find a feather. And they began to look. And some people put their hand in the air and the feather landed there, because that is the luck of some people. And other people, they had to work hard, digging in the ground, plucking the feather from the muck and cleaning it down. Other people took it from a bush or from the back of an animal or the beak of a bird, until everybody had a feather. And Sheila said, pull your feather. And they did. And when they did, they felt the change. The connection to the one in front. The connection to the one behind. To the one on the right. And the one on the left. As they became a great formation of starlings. One thought now. One heartbeat. And they rose in a gentle mass through the trees, and they flew between the sun and the fighting farmers. And the farmers looked up. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you look up? And when they looked up, the starlings took the shape of a great heart in the sky. And then, as if they had planned it, they beat their wings. And right there in the sky, the heart came to life. And the farmers smiled. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you smile? And as they looked down into one another's faces, still smiling, and they put down their tools and they made a deal to go home, for they knew they had enough. Oh, mahu, mahu, mahu.